So guys, as I promised on one of my videos the other week, today we are going to be going over the underbarrel attachments in Battlefield 2042 and essentially looking at what they do, how they act, and essentially whether or not they do what they say they do in their descriptions. This is a video that I've done in the past, but obviously with update 4.0 and 4.1, there were a fair few changes to the way that both the weapons themselves work as well as all the attachments, and then obviously with update 1.0 and 1.1, there's probably been even more changes as well. So we're going to be going through all of that today. We're going to be taking a look at the AK-24, the M5A3, and the PBX-45 just to get a good sort of overall look at a few different weapons. And we're not going to be looking at like underbarrel grenade launchers and stuff, just essentially the grips and seeing how they affect your recoil. Now, in the coming weeks and months, I'm also going to be doing the same for all the other attachment types, so the barrel attachments, the ammo types, and all those sorts of things. And so if you guys do enjoy this type of content, be sure to hit that subscribe button. I've got plenty of stuff like this planned on the way in the future. But with that being said, let's get stuck right into it. So like I said, I've already done this video in the past, but obviously that video is essentially redundant now because a lot of these changes have been made to the underbarrel attachments and just the weapons in general. And so they are actually acting fairly different to how they were acting when I made those videos probably 5 or so months ago. Now, there are 4 different grip types in the game, and obviously I have also counted the factory barrel, so essentially no attachment. And what I'll be doing here is going through just a single clip with, like I said, the AK-24, the M5A3, and the PBX-45 with all of those different underbarrel attachments, and just showing you guys one example of how that recoil pattern works. Now, the thing to just keep in mind before I get any further into this video is that recoil is essentially random each time. Every weapon does have a sort of rough outline for a recoil pattern, but they are also different every single time. So having only tested these once, it's not the most, overly thorough testing that I could have done. The reason I've just done it once is essentially because there's no one wants to sit here and watch like 10 clips get emptied into a cement wall. No one wants to watch that. And you can see the difference anyway. I'm not trying to get like the most precise, statistics here. It's essentially just showing a quick comparison of how all of these act. Mostly just to give you guys a good idea of what you want to use. And then obviously once you have the idea for what attachment type you think suits you the best, you can try that out. And if it doesn't feel right, then obviously you still know how the other ones work and you can obviously try and use those ones as well. So just thought I would mention that first. This isn't the most like thorough testing. Generally when you're testing stuff like this, you need to do it like 100 times over to get very precise results. And that's not really the point of this video. It's just to show a sort of a quick glimpse at what the recoil pattern roughly is when you use these attachments. So looking here at the AK-24, firstly I've done static tests, and so for all of these weapons I'm doing one test with the static test, just standing completely still and shooting at the wall without touching the right stick at all, so that's completely unaffected by me trying to do recoil control or anything like that. And then I'm also doing a moving test because some of these attachments actually are meant to help when you're moving, so it would feel a little bit unfair to only do a static test when at the end of the day most of the time that you're shooting at an enemy you are probably going to be moving. As you can see here from the static testing on the AK-24, for me anyway, the LWG grip, which is actually the first one, that looks to be the most like straight horizontally, so it essentially just has vertical recoil. There doesn't seem to be too much horizontal recoil there at all, whereas if you look at the other ones, they all do sort of hang out there a little bit more to the right, and they might be a little bit more accurate. But for me personally, the LWG grip for the static tests here seems to be the most easy to handle. Now, the weird part about that is the LWG grip is actually meant to help when you're moving, and so the fact that it is, pretty accurate while you're static, and that's meant to be a negative of this attachment, that bodes very well for the LWG grip. Now, once again, with the AK-24, I've then done the moving test as well, and this is where you can really see the difference. The LWG grip, once again, it looks a lot straighter. I do also want to clarify that this is, because of my field of view, you can see on that wall that it's actually, there's a bit of a fisheye sort of lens going on with the camera here. It looks like that's actually affecting it. I actually, during this test, I turned down the field of view to, I think, 60, and it looks pretty much the same. So the field of view isn't affecting how these look because the wall technically isn't straight on my screen here. So I just thought I would mention that because a lot of people might say, oh, it only looks better because it's on the left, and because of that sort of fisheye from that high field of view, it looks like it is better. But no, I did test that. I turned it down to 60. For some reason, I didn't record that, but don't be too worried about the field of view there. Now, as you can see, the LWG grip again on the left there, that one does once again look a lot more sort of just purely vertical than the rest. A lot of them are heading off to the right there, whereas the LWG grip is a bit more vertical, and that is meant to be the case. That is the one that's meant to be more accurate while you're moving. So for me personally, the LWG grip, at least with the AK-24 is definitely the best option because one, like I said, most gunfights you're moving, it's pretty rare that you're going to just stand still unless maybe you're sniping, but then even then, it is actually still pretty damn accurate when you are just static like I showed in those previous tests. So for me personally, I would say the LWG grip for the AK-24 is the best option, at least from this testing anyway. Now, moving on to the M5A3, I won't lie, the results here are pretty much identical, so it does show that there are slight changes between the different weapons. Every weapon handles differently, and obviously the attachments are going to handle slightly different on each weapon, but the results here for the M5A3 are essentially the exact same as they were for the AK-24. The LWG grip once again does handle itself really well on that static test, which is meant to be the one that it fails on because it's actually meant to reduce your accuracy while you're static, but it doesn't really seem to do that as much as it probably should, to be honest. While once again moving on to the moving test, you can see that it is a lot more vertical. It's just got a lot less sort of horizontal recoil. Now that one does look a little bit dodgy because it's kind of got a gap at the top there. You can see that there's just like a gap and it makes it look a little bit inaccurate. For these moving results, you can see that the others kind of do look a bit more accurate in terms of where the shots are going. So like I said, they do all act differently depending on the weapon, depending on the attachment per weapon. But again, I think here I would say between moving and static, I still think the LWG grip is probably the best. If not, the BCG light grip is probably the next best. You can see that one, the second from the left there, that is pretty tight and it's pretty accurate, and it did fairly well in the static testing as well. So I'd still go with the LWG, but the BCG light grip is another really good alternative. And the main thing that I'm sort of taking away here is that other than the LWG grip is meant to be less accurate while he's static, everything is essentially working as intended, which didn't used to be the case with these attachments. That's why they probably updated them in update 4.0. But yeah, regardless of these tests, you guys can at least rest assured that what they say that they're doing now, they are generally doing that. They weren't doing that in the past. So at least that makes it easier when it comes to choosing your attachments. Now, obviously I did want to try this for an SMG as well, because obviously assault rifles and SMGs, they do handle differently. Again, the results for these were pretty similar for the PBX-45. What I will say is that I think it was the Cobra grip, the one on the second from the right there, the static movement, that to me looks a little bit better than the LWG grip. But then as you can see, once we go into the moving test, that one goes all over the place. So I probably wouldn't recommend that one. I do think that once again, the LWG grip just seems to be a kind of like the all-rounder, because it's doing well in the static test and it's doing well in the moving test as well. And I think I would prefer that rather than having one that's really good in one situation and really bad in another situation. And so yeah, similar to the previous two tests, the order for me is probably the LWG grip being the best underbarrel grip in the game, and then probably the BCG light grip, which is the smaller one. That would probably be number 2 for me, and that does seem to be the case across pretty much all of these weapons. Like I said, I've only tested 3 out of like 20 odd weapons. Maybe the LMGs handle differently, maybe all the different SMGs handle differently than the PBX-45. It's sort of hard to tell unless you test every weapon and test them all, 10 times over to make sure that they are acting the exact same every time. But from these tests, that is pretty much what I can gather, that the LWG grip probably comes in as the jack of all trades, and for me that is the one that I use the most, and then the BCG light grip is probably the second best option. Now, just quickly before we finish up, I did also want to test the underbarrel attachments when it comes to the hip fire. So obviously the laser sight is meant to help with hip fire accuracy, and then the rattlesnake light grip is also recently meant to be increasing hip fire accuracy as well. Initially that wasn't the case back in 5 months ago. I remember saying that the rattlesnake light grip was actually the best grip because that was the one that was the most accurate while aimed down sights. Well, that did change, and that is now essentially only affecting the hip fire accuracy. Now, from these results, you can see there that there's just the factory barrel, the rattlesnake, and then the laser sight. I will say that the rattlesnake probably looks a little bit more accurate there than the laser sight does, but the downside to the rattlesnake is that yes, it increases your hip fire accuracy, but it actually reduces your ADS accuracy. So that one does have a downside, whereas the laser sight, the only downside to that is that enemies can see it, and to be honest, it's pretty hard to see that laser sight. Maybe on a map like a Manifest where it's dark, you can see it a little bit easier, but for the most part, you're not going to get detected and spotted because you're using a laser sight. And so for me, if I'm going to use a weapon, let's just say like the Vector or the K30 in this game, that is really good for hip fire. Like that gun is actually really solid with hip fire. I'm going to use the laser sight on that rather than the rattlesnake light grip, simply because the laser sight really doesn't have any downsides to it, and they have also finally fixed that where you don't have to turn it on every time as well. It is now just automatically on. And so I just thought I would quickly show that to you guys. If you want the best accuracy for hip fire, I would say the rattlesnake is better, but it does have that downside of when you do ADS, it's going to be less accurate. And so for me, I personally prefer to use the regular laser sight. So anyway guys, hopefully that gave you a really quick snapshot of how these attachments work. You can see they were all pretty similar between each different weapon, so there are going to be slight differences, but they do seem to work pretty similar across the board. And again, the point of the video isn't to be the most accurate testing or anything like that. It's mostly just to give you guys a quick snapshot of how they all work, and then from there you guys can kind of choose which ones suit your playstyle the best. Like I said, I am going to be doing the same sort of testing for the barrel attachments, so all the suppressors, compensators, all those sorts of things, and I will probably do the same for the ammo types as well, because they do affect the weapons quite drastically. So be sure to hit that subscribe button and keep your eyes peeled for those videos. They should be out within the next 2 to 3 weeks or so. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like down below. If you are new to the channel, be sure to hit that sub button, and if you guys want to support the content that I make here on YouTube, then consider becoming a channel member. But with that being said, thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll see you all out there on the battlefield.